kind of an imaginary world for me. It didn't seem real. And then also, I had an uncle who was a pilot. He was shot down. He was missing for 26 years. They found his plane over Laos in the early 90s. He's on the Vietnam Wall. His name's on the wall in DC. And my younger brother was born without an esophagus. And that was from the exposure from Agent Orange and all the dioxin my father was exposed to, because it was a tremendous amount of it was stored on the base that he was at in Da Nang. So I had my first chance to go to Vietnam in 1993 after I finished art school and started my career. I was going to stay a few months, and my story continued long after that, which I'll explain more tonight. So that's my connection with Vietnam, how it starts.
So Quế Mai, can you talk a little bit about your respective work, both past and present?
Thank you so much, team, for interviewing us. Peter's story reminded me of the poetry of the great poet Nguyễn of Vietnam, who wrote, nói cho cùng trong mỗi cuộc chiến tranh, phe nào thắng thì nhân dân đều bại. In the end of each and every war, whoever wins, the people always lose. We have here in the audience Vietnamese Americans and also American veterans, and I have had conversations with you, and I know that you also have, inherited this trauma from the war, and it's really hard to overcome. So throughout my life, throughout my work, my mission is to highlight the horror of war beyond imagination, how wars destroy nature, turn human beings into monsters sometimes. To highlight the fact that it is time that the human race should grow up. We should grow up. We are all children of Mother Earth. I think it's time that we learn to love each other, embrace each other, celebrate each other, and uplift each other, rather than killing and destroying. And I have this fear that one day the human race will make ourselves extinct. Right? We are doing it. We are doing it onto ourselves, onto our children and grandchildren. But I have hope in literature. I think, the weapons for wars is dehumanization. I remember once I interviewed an American veteran. He said on his flight to Vietnam, he was so afraid of killing the Vietnamese. And his commander said, don't worry about killing the Vietnamese. They have been at wars with other nations for thousands of years. Life is cheap for them. They don't love their families like we do, like Americans do. And as a young man, he didn't know, so he tried to believe in it. So I think, even General Westmoreland, the commander of the US armies in Vietnam, who said in a documentary, and you can Google it, he said life is cheap in the Orient. Dehumanization is really the weapon for wars. And with literature, when we read literature from other countries, we can see that we are all the same. We love our families. We love to eat, to sing, to dance, to have peace. We don't want bombs and bullets to fall onto us. Nobody wants that. So that's why I feel like I had to write for stories that need to be told. And my story started on a motorbike. Can you believe it? This is the year, those were the years I worked in Hanoi. I worked for an NGO, I worked in poverty alleviation. And every day I rode this motorbike from home to work, from West Lake to Doi Can Street on the other side of the city of Hanoi. And on a motorbike, you feel life around you. All the seasons come to you. The sing-song of the street sellers. The smell of the food, and poetry came to me. This is something I don't advise you to do. Try and write poetry. No, dangerous. I got fined by the police many times. But I couldn't help it. I was always dreaming on my motorbike with my hair flying in the wind, with the flowers above me. And I would ride this long bike ride, and by the time I arrived in an office, there was some poems coming out of me, and I would write it right away. And I got fined by the police, but still some of my first ever published poems came from that time. And then I published some poetry collections, and then I also translated quite a bit of literature. But I fell in love with Vietnamese language, so I wanted to invite international readers to Vietnam through literature. So I started to translate quite a few of well-known Vietnamese poets. And then at that time, I was translating for conferences between American veterans and Vietnamese veterans. I felt so moved by the stories of Americans whom I had loved and whom I had been told to be the enemy. But by reading their work, I saw the humanity of American people, and I wanted to bring that humanity to Vietnam. So I spent years translating the work of American veterans. One of them is Bruce Weigel, who one of his famous collection is Song of the Palm. So he really wrote about the horror of war. And then I translated my own poetry too, and published it in The Secret of Hoa Sen. And I was looking for a novel to translate, and I couldn't find it, and so I started doing something really crazy. I started writing my first novel in English, which is called The Mountain Sing. This novel took me 7 years to write, and also Dust Child. So The Mountain Sing is my effort to document untold stories about Vietnamese history. So it contains a lot of stories which are censored in Vietnam. We're not allowed to talk about like the horror of the land reform and the impact of quite a few things, but also the impact of the Vietnam War. But more than that, Vietnam is a country with more than 4,000 years of history and culture. And in Dust Child, I wanted to document the impact of the war on all sides as well. I have a character who's a mixed race child, born out of a relationship between an American soldier and a Vietnamese woman, and also an American veteran who returns to Vietnam. Unknown to his wife, he had a child in Vietnam. So he now has to deal with the secret of his past. And Dust Child is also has two Vietnamese women who had to survive the war. And with my latest, now I did something even more crazy, because I grew up in the rural area of Vietnam, and I didn't have the chance to learn English until the 8th grade. So writing in English was challenging, and I learned a lot. But I did something even more crazy. I wrote this latest book in English and in poetry in English. So it's called The Color of Peace, and the poem My Mother's Rise is one of the poems in this collection. And I'm donating because this collection commemorates the 50th anniversary of the war, so donating 100% of the proceeds to 3 organizations that supports the victims of war, Peace Tree Vietnam, No Fund, and Renew. They remove unexploded ordinances from Vietnam. Believe it or not, people still die from unexploded ordinance in Vietnam. And farmland still cannot be usable because of a lot of explosive underneath. So these organizations, they remove the bombs and plant trees and build kindergarten and schools and support also the victims of Agent Orange. So in Vietnam until today, there are children born deformed from Agent Orange. And I've heard stories from American veterans who were affected by this terrible chemical as well. And as you heard, Peter's brother was also affected. So I think together we can do good things for our world. Thank you.
So, let's talk about your work and your books. I'm also curious, as somebody went to art school and you went to another country, did you go there seeking the work, or did the work find you?
Great question. I went there seeking the work. I kind of had an idea of what I knew I wanted to do because of these slideshows that I told you that I grew up having in our living room. I just had this idea of Vietnam, of what I had seen through the slides, but also what I wanted to see that I didn't see in these slides and that I hadn't seen in anything else out anywhere. All the imagery on Vietnam that even up until the 90s, it was all National Geographic type style work, color, reportage type work, or stuff about the war, and there was nothing about art. So, and I was an artist, and I wanted to, so I've been photographing there for 30 years. I went there, I have 10 major bodies of work throughout the country that I've been working on. I have 3 books, which these are them. The third one, Spires, is just coming out right now, just finished actually printing. And the idea of my first project was to photograph portraits and landscapes. I wanted, as a little kid, I wanted to see like what it looked like inside people's living, what they looked like in their houses, inside their living and working environments. Because again, everything I had seen was in the streets and kind of journalistic work. So my idea when I went there was I was going to photograph landscapes from all over the country, and I was going to photograph people inside the living and working environments that had no interaction with any modern Western society. And so that's the subject of my first book, which is Portraits and Landscapes. This is one of the images here. This happens to be, this is a landscape from the first book. It's in Lai Châu province, which is in the far northwest of Vietnam. It's one of the least inhabited provinces in the country. So it's right on this image is right on the Chinese border. I'll tell you just a quick synopsis of this because it was, I came up this mountain pass from this side, and it was absolutely pouring rain, fogged in, and windy, and so on, and I hadn't been into this province at this time. This was in 1995, early 95, and I said, at this time I'm going to get into that province because I hadn't been into it. So I drove up with my assistant, and we finally just fought up through this, went up this super long mountain pass, got up to the top, and it literally opened up into this. It's all foggy on this side. There's mountains like this that I came up and crested over into this. And I made this image, and it was like heaven to me, opening up into this. The wind was blowing, and I've been back there like 7 times since. It's never been the same. It's never been the same. So, and these are some of the other images. These are landscapes from Halong Bay, which is in the far northeast of Vietnam on the Chinese border. It's 1,500 square kilometers of those limestone karsts. It's like a labyrinth, floating around on these boats. And so throughout my career, I actually also started, I covered Vietnam for Time magazine. And this was later on in my career, going through that. So I found the work, but I went after work, but then the work found me as I've gone through these 10 bodies of work is something that I've just realized, going through, and I discover things while living there and start to work on things.
So you and I were talking a little bit before we got going about sort of memory and history. And we often think we know something about something from having read it, and you grew up seeing it through your father's eyes.
Yes.
How did walking into the culture for yourself, how did that change what you thought you knew about history and what you thought you knew in terms of the culture?
Well, great question, because as soon as I landed, my very first day in '93, I felt so at home. And it was like my entire life from being a kid had just prepared me for this moment. And something that I failed to tell you earlier is in the late '80s, my father went back and he helped. He went back to Vietnam in 1988, when they let American servicemen come back, and he went into Hanoi, and then in '89 he helped start a health organization that gives donated medical equipment from the US back to hospitals, and then take doctors from Vietnam and bring them over to the US, and they observe surgery and for training, and then this is used equipment, and then they would go back to Vietnam and then teach the other doctors around the country how to use that. And so, yeah, it was all of that, compiled in my life. I felt that it would have been like training my whole life when I landed. Of course, it was something that I didn't expect, but I felt so comfortable. But like you and I were talking about, we grew up at the same time, and all we learned about was Vietnam as a war. And Vietnam's a country, it's not a war. It's this 20-year span in a 4,000-year-old history. And so, yeah, it's kind of, I knew some things, or I felt I knew some things, but at the same time, everything was new coming in.
So, in terms of challenging experiences, Quế Mai, can you talk about what informed you, what shaped your desire to document the war for your writing?
Thank you very much. I was born in the north of Vietnam, and when I was 6 years old, my parents uprooted us to move to South Vietnam because life in the south was a lot better, the weather was better. Along the way, I saw a lot of bomb craters, I saw a lot of devastations, and one of my most vivid memory is, my friends disappearing from my class in the late 70s and early 80s. And they would join, one of these fishing boats, risking their lives. And I did not know what was going on. It was scary at that time because, so many people were leaving, and until today, I don't know what happened to some of my friends. And I just want to say that I found friendship with a lot of Vietnamese Americans through my writing. And I think, I had always wondered, what if the war didn't happen, what would become of us? So I just want to thank my friend Michelle today, who connected with me after reading The Mountain Sing, and she invited me to Portland for the first time to speak at her her school. And she didn't know me as a person, but she put her job out there, herself out there to sponsor my visit to Portland. And she trusted that I would do an okay job. I couldn't believe it. And this time she invited me to stay with her. So Michelle, thank you so much. And to all my Vietnamese American friends, like Aaron, like many of you who have put together this program, sponsored us, made us feel so at home with the wonderful food as well. This poem is for you. Thorn of roses. You take me to this garden where the roses open to the nectar of morning sun, each slender petal shivering in the soft wind 8,000 miles from our homeland. The roses listen to you tell me about your trip out to sea on a tiny boat, sardine among starving people. Your mother and brother skeletons among them. How at 2 years old you had to flee our homeland into the arms of waves so tall even heavens were dark. How your boat ran out of petrol, and those who died from illness or starvation didn't have the grace of a coffin, their bodies tossed into the churning mouths of the ocean. And how your non-stop crying made your mother want to jump headfirst out of the boat. The journey had been long for both of us. But you are here today with me in this rose garden filled with the intense California sun, longing for homeland and dreaming. But the scent of roses tells me how nice flung from the past still cut into you and make you bleed. Tuệ Mi, Teresa Mai Trúc. We both inherited the war. We inherited the thorns of roses that still stab us. We inherited the yearning for peace that we knit into stories. We are the daughters of the same mother, Vietnam, who live on the two sides of the ocean, bound together by thorns and by the scent of this morning's roses, and by the stories that will never set us free unless we tell them.